Today's lesson is when the earth begins to shake. Hi, everybody. I'm Roger.
And I'm Helen.
And we open up the month of September talking about earthquakes. Let me just say this right now. The reason we're talking about earthquakes is not because there's going to be an earthquake this month. Let me get that straight. We're not talking about earthquakes in order for one to happen. We certainly don't hope they happen. But unfortunately, here in Taiwan, we do experience earthquakes from time to time, and we do need to be prepared.
That's right. And I think I figured out a way to predict earthquakes or to know when earthquakes are about to happen. Because I have 4 cats at home. And so, for instance, a few months ago, my cats were playing on the floor, running around while I was sitting on the couch watching TV. Then suddenly they stopped playing. They stood still. They became really attentive as if they were trying to figure out what was happening or listening for something. Then a few seconds later, an earthquake hit. My apartment started shaking. The chandeliers started swinging back and forth. And it was only then that I realized that my cats knew that an earthquake was happening before I knew that it was going to happen.
That's kind of interesting. I remember my brother saying something similar way back in 1989 or something during the Loma Prieta earthquake in San Francisco. His cat suddenly disappeared just before the earthquake hit. So it's kind of interesting that we are going to talk about that in today's program, how animals might actually help us predict earthquakes.
That's right. And that is the topic of today's lesson. And we'll be right back after we listen to the first part.
When the earth begins to shake, people in Taiwan are certainly no strangers to earthquakes, which occur when the enormous plates that make up Earth's surface lurch and grind against each other. Because earthquakes can cause serious damage, scientists have tried all kinds of methods over the years to predict when they might happen.
大家好，第一部分我们看到单字 lurch。这个字是动词，指摇晃、晃动或是突然倾斜。我们可以说 Tracy saw a drunk man lurching all the way through the train station. Tracy 看到一名喝醉的男子正摇摇晃晃地走过火车站。或是 The bus suddenly lurched forward, making a few people fall over. 那辆巴士突然向前倾斜，害几个乘客因此跌倒。另外补充一个包含 lurch 的相关片语 Leave somebody in the lurch.表示让某人无所适从，或是让某人处于困境中。Lurch 在这边当名词，指突然的倾斜、摇晃或是改变。例如 The other members of the rock band were left in the lurch when the singer didn't show up for the concert. 这个摇滚乐团的主唱没有现身演唱会，使得其他团员不知如何是好。接着我们看到动词 grind 指用力摩擦或是研磨、碾。例如We put oil in the machine so its parts would not grind together. 我们把油放进机器，让它的零件不会互相摩擦。或是 You need to grind the pepper into a powder before sprinkling it on the meat. 你要先把胡椒磨成粉，才能把它撒在肉上。另外补充一个包含 grind 的相关片语 grind down， 表示磨碎或是折磨。我们可以说 The cook ground down the spices before adding them to the pot.厨师把新香料磨碎再加进锅里。或是 The company's tough work environment eventually ground down most employees. 该公司辛苦的工作环境最终让大多数员工难以承受。
Okay, so when the earth begins to shake, that's the title of our lesson for today. So yeah, what happens when an earthquake begins? We kind of freak out. We kind of sit there still and wonder what's happening. Am I kind of moving in my chair? Or is that actually an earthquake? Oh, it's actually an earthquake. Is it a big one? Is it a small one? And if it's a big one, what should we do? Should we get up and run outside? And indeed, we're going to be talking about what happens when an earthquake occurs. And here in the first paragraph, it says, people in Taiwan are certainly no strangers to earthquakes, which occur when the enormous plates that make up Earth's surface lurch and grind against each other. So first of all, we've got two ideas in this sentence. The first idea is that people in Taiwan are no strangers to earthquakes. If you are no stranger to something, that means you are very familiar with that thing.
Right, you are familiar with that thing. You know that thing very well. For instance, I could say, I am no stranger to hardship. I have gone through a lot of difficulties in my life. I know how to deal with them, so I am no stranger to difficulties. Here in Taiwan, people are no strangers to earthquakes because earthquakes happen quite frequently in Taiwan. And what are earthquakes actually? Well, they occur when the enormous plates that make up Earth's surface lurch and grind against each other. So something that is enormous is very big, and Earth's plates are very big. Plates are the layers of rock that form the Earth's surface. So, of course, they are enormous, and they make up the Earth's surface. And when these plates lurch and grind, in other words, when they move suddenly in an uncontrolled way, that's when they lurch. And when they grind, which means when they move slowly with a lot of noise or rub against each other, that is when an earthquake happens.
Yeah, to lurch, of course, means that you move suddenly forward. Sometimes car accidents happen because a car suddenly lurches forward. The person in the car was too busy playing on their phone, and they accidentally took their foot off the brake, and the car lurched forward and banged into the car ahead of it. And indeed, that's what happens with these enormous plates. They're not small, they're not medium-sized, but they're huge. They're colossal, they're gigantic, they're enormous. And a plate is something flat and hard. You eat off a plate sometimes, but these are the plates on the Earth's crust. And there are many different plates here in Asia that grind and rub up against each other.
Yes, and because earthquakes can cause serious damage, scientists have tried all kinds of methods over the years to predict when they might happen. So because earthquakes, especially the big ones, can cause a lot of damage, they can cause buildings to crumble, to fall to the ground. They can cause bridges to collapse and roads to collapse. Sometimes they can cause even fatalities. People can die during earthquakes. So because of this, scientists have been trying to find a way to know when an earthquake is about to happen. They have been trying over the years to be able to predict when an earthquake might happen. So to predict is to say what you will think will happen in the future. Weather forecasters, weather reports predict the weather every night.
And of course, scientists want to predict those earthquakes because, we can't stop them. There's no way to stop them. The earth is just too powerful. And of course, people die because they don't have enough warning. Imagine how many people could have been saved in the 9/21 earthquake back in 1999. Some buildings fell down and people were killed as a result. If we could have predicted the earthquake, they would have had time to escape. Okay, that brings us to the end of the first part of our lesson. Let's move on now to the second part.
The earliest device designed to detect earthquakes was invented in AD 132 by the Chinese thinker Zhang Heng. Zhang created a large bronze urn decorated with 8 dragons, each facing a different direction and holding a ball in its mouth. When an earthquake occurred, the vibrations would cause a ball to drop from a dragon's mouth, thus signaling the earthquake's onset and indicating which direction the vibrations were coming from.
第二部分我们看到单字 onset， 这个字是名词，指开始或是开端。例如 The onset of autumn, when the trees first begin to change colors, is my favorite time of year. 初秋时树木开始变色，是一年中我最喜欢的时节。或是 The onset of the rainy season always makes Amber sad. 雨季的开始总是让 Amber 感伤。
And welcome back to the second part. So in history, there have been certain occasions and certain people who have tried to look for ways to predict earthquakes. The earliest device designed to detect earthquakes was invented in AD 132 by the Chinese thinker Zhang Heng.
Okay, so indeed, that was a device that was designed to detect earthquakes. A device is some kind of machine that is designed and built to have some kind of purpose. Okay, so of course, most of us are used to carrying around our devices, such as our smartphones, our tablets, our laptop computers, and stuff like that. But this was a particular device that was designed to detect earthquakes. Maybe not to predict them, but to at least indicate that an earthquake had happened. And this happened way back in the year 132 AD. AD, of course, refers to the modern era. Anno Domino, the year of God, the year of our Lord, if you're a Christian. So indeed, right now, of course, it's 2021 AD.
Right, so Zhang created a large bronze urn decorated with 8 dragons, each facing a different direction and holding a ball in its mouth. So an urn is a container that might hold food, or sometimes it might hold the ashes of somebody who has already passed away. And bronze is a metal that is a combination of copper and tin. So he created a large bronze urn and decorated this with 8 dragons. And these 8 dragons, they're all facing different directions. So we might imagine the urn as something that's round, and the 8 dragons are facing different directions from the center. And each dragon has a ball in its mouth.
Okay, so that was the design of this particular device. It was made out of bronze. Maybe the balls were made out of bronze as well. And when an earthquake occurred, when an earthquake struck, the vibrations would cause a ball to drop from a dragon's mouth, thus signaling the earthquake's onset and indicating which direction the vibrations were coming from. So, of course, when you have an earthquake, you have vibrations. That's when things move back and forth and up and down. Those are vibrations. And those vibrations would cause a ball to drop from a dragon's mouth. And that would signal the earthquake's onset. It would indicate that an earthquake had started. Onset is the beginning of something. And it would also indicate or tell us which direction the vibrations were coming from. So I suppose if we had such a device in Taipei when the Gigi earthquake took place, then a ball on the south side or maybe the southwest side of the device would have fallen out of the mouth of the dragon.
That's right. And the word onset here indeed means the beginning of something, but usually it's used to refer to something that's bad. So the onset of a natural disaster such as an earthquake, or the onset of a disease such as cancer.
Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of our lesson for today. Let's move on now and talk about the third part.
Today, some scientists are trying to determine whether it's possible to use live animals to provide early earthquake warnings. In one earthquake-prone area in northern Italy, scientists attached motion sensors to cows, sheep, and dogs, as these animals were thought to be sensitive to earthquakes. The sensors showed that the animals became particularly restless a few hours before an earthquake hit. Despite these promising results, our current methods of predicting earthquakes in advance are neither accurate nor reliable.
第三部分我们看到名词 sensor， 意思是感应器或是感测器。我们可以说 When someone walks in front of the sensor, the lights will turn on. 当有人从这个感应器前面通过，灯就会亮。另外，在这个字的字尾加上 y， 就成了形容词 sensory， 指感觉的或是知觉的。举例来说 Ryan experienced sensory overload standing in the busy mall. Ryan 站在这忙碌的商场中，体验到感官难以负荷的感觉。最后我们看到单字 promising， 这个字是形容词，指有希望的或是很有前途的，会有好结果的。像是 Your business idea is promising, But I think you need to write a plan before asking the bank for a loan. 你的商业点子很有希望，但我认为你在向银行贷款前，需要先写一份计划。或是 The treatment is showing promising results. 这个疗法的结果显示前景可期。
And welcome back to the third part. So we looked at the way that earthquakes were detected back in AD 132, but other advances have been made since then. Today, some scientists are trying to determine whether it's possible to use live animals to provide early earthquake warnings. So it's no longer necessary to invent a device, to create a device or a machine to do these things. We can just turn to our live animals, such as my cats, to provide early earthquake warnings.
Of course, we have devices that measure earthquakes to tell us how big they are and where they happened. But the most important thing is to know when they're going to happen, when to predict those earthquakes so that we can make the proper preparations so we don't get hurt. So, of course, lots of scientists these days are trying to determine if it's possible to use live animals like Helen's cats there to provide early earthquake warnings. In one earthquake-prone area in northern Italy, scientists attached motion sensors to cows, sheep, and dogs, as these animals were thought to be sensitive to earthquakes. So this took place in northern Italy, which would be the part of Italy that's in the Alps mountains there, I guess. And the scientists there attached these motion sensors to various kinds of animals. So here we've got the verb to attach, which means you just put something onto something and then it stays there. So they attached these sensors to these animals. A sensor, of course, is something that can tell if something is there or not.
Right. So, for instance, when I give a birthday present to somebody, I will often attach a birthday card to that present so that the person will know who gave that present to them, that I was the giver of the present. And a sensor can be used in many different situations. For instance, some modern refrigerators have temperature sensors to help maintain a cold temperature in the refrigerator. So a sensor is just something that can react to motion or light or heat. And in an earthquake-prone area such as northern Italy, it just means that that area experiences a lot of earthquakes. So if I am accident prone, it means that I tend to make a lot of accidents, or I tend to have a lot of accidents.
Oh, no, that would be terrible. You don't want to have a lot of accidents, so please don't be accident prone. But earthquake prone areas are places that have lots of earthquakes. So Japan is earthquake prone. Taiwan, of course, is earthquake prone, especially in the Hualien area. Everybody says, oh, don't go to Hualien because it's earthquake prone. If you go down there, you might feel an earthquake or something like that. But this, of course, is an area of Italy that has lots of earthquakes. And again, they attach those sensors to cows, sheep, and to dogs. I wonder why they did not attach them to cats. But in any case, people think that these types of animals, cows, sheep, and dogs, are sensitive to earthquakes.
That's right. And the sensors showed that the animals became particularly restless a few hours before an earthquake hit. So when you become restless, you're unable to stay still. You move around a lot. So the sensors showed that the animals were moving around a lot. They couldn't stay still. Maybe they felt nervous because maybe they knew that an earthquake was about to happen. And they were able to detect that the animals reacted this way a few hours before an earthquake hit. So that's quite a long time. That's quite in advance of the actual earthquake. Unlike my cats who acted that way just a few seconds before the earthquake, here we're talking about a few hours before the earthquake.
So maybe cows, sheep, and dogs are better than cats at predicting earthquakes. So again, these animals became restless. They couldn't sit still. They were running around, getting excited. And despite these promising results, our current methods of predicting earthquakes in advance are neither accurate nor reliable. So even though we had these promising results, we still really can't predict earthquakes in advance. So these are promising results. If something's promising, that means something good could happen with this thing in the future, okay? So they had some good results by using these animals. The results were promising. Maybe we could use this technology in the future, but it's probably too early to tell. And again, we've got our current methods of predicting earthquakes in advance, but they're not accurate and they're not reliable. So, of course, if you predict something in advance, that means you do it ahead of time. You do it before that thing happens. Sometimes, for example, if you don't have a lot of money, you might want to get your pay in advance at your job. I've never done that. I don't like to get money for something I haven't done, but sometimes people do that. They get their pay in advance because they just don't have enough money to pay their bills.
Yes, and they're not accurate or reliable, so it's not a good idea to depend on this method, to rely on this method to tell whether an earthquake is going to happen. And here, the word promising, yes, you can use it to refer to results. You can also use it to talk about a person. So I could say, for instance, Tommy was a promising young man, and he is sure to have a bright future, which means Tommy is somebody who shows signs of being able to have great success in the future.
You have a promising future, indeed. Okay, that brings us to the end of our discussion for today. It's time now to listen to our Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第3部分提到，科学家把动作感应器装在牛、羊和狗的身上，因为这些动物被认为对地震敏感。那文中是用到 These animals were thought to be sensitive to earthquakes 来表达说这些动物被认为是对地震敏感的。那它用到的句型是主词 be thought to 再加原形动词来表达某人或某事物被认为是怎么样。那除了这个句型之外，也可以用 people think再加上 that 子句，或者是 it is thought 再加 that 子句来表达一般认为怎么样，一般相信怎么样。好，举例来说， People think that he is one of the greatest scientists ever 也可以说 It is thought that he is one of the greatest scientists ever 也可以说 He is thought to be one of the greatest scientists ever一般认为他是有史以来最伟大的科学家之一。好，那么接着读到课文最后一句，他说 Despite these promising results, our current methods of predicting earthquakes in advance are neither accurate nor reliable. 好，这边有2个重点哦。第一个，他用到 despite也可以用 in spite of 去表达尽管怎么样，虽然怎么样。那要特别注意它们是介系词，后面是要接名词或动名词。像文中呢，它是用 despite 去接名词， Despite these promising results 就是表达尽管有这些还不错的结果，但怎么样怎么样。好，那我们来造个例句， They continued to hike despite the rain 尽管下雨，他们还是继续健行。好，那么补充一下，如果呢要在 despite 或是 in spite of 后面接子句，我们必须先接名词同位语，像是 the fact 之类的，然后再接 that 子句，所以它句型就会写作 despite the fact 或者是 in spite of the fact， 然后去接 that 子句。像刚刚的例句，我们也可以改成说They continued to hike despite the fact that it was raining. 好，再来看第2个重点是 neither A nor B 表示既不怎么样也不怎么样， A 和 B 都不怎么样。好，那么其中的 A、B 词性要相同。好，像课文里面呢是连接2个形容词 neither accurate nor reliable去表达说既不准确也不可靠。好，那特别注意，如果是连接动词，这个动词的时态必须一致。例如 He neither smokes nor drinks 他不抽烟也不喝酒。好，那如果我们现在是要用 neither nor 去连接主词，特别注意哦，后面的动词我们是要配合最靠近的主词，也就是主词 be 来做变化。举例来说，Neither Jane nor her parents have ever been to Europe. Jane 和她爸妈都不曾去过欧洲。那这时候例句里面这个助动词就是要配合最靠近的主词 her parents， 所以我们是用 have， 不是用 has。好，那么以上是今天重点整理，我们来回顾今天的单字吧。
Enormous. There's an enormous statue of a lion outside that building. Grind. Earthquakes are common in places where the Earth's plates grind against each other. Predict. Rob predicts that the price of gold will increase over the next 5 years. Device. Steve opened his garage door with a small electronic device in his car. Attach. Paula attached a flash to her camera so she could take photos in the dark. Sensor. Smartphones have sensors that track a user's location and movement. Promising. Jane's teacher considers her to be a very promising student.
Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Roger.
I'm Helen.
See you next time.